Back to Spirit and Counsel, the Wholehearted Supernatural Life. I'm Justin Perry, and this is my lovely, beautiful wife.
Am I saying my name?
What's your name?
I'm LeeAnna Perry. It's great to be with y'all tonight.
Yes, thank you for joining us. If you are watching live, we do this obviously as a podcast so that it's recorded and posted and people can watch after the fact. But if you happen to be with us live, consider sharing, especially if you're on one of the Facebook pages. Clicking share really kind of helps us to get it out in front of more people. If you are on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video on Facebook as well, and also, wherever you're watching from, go ahead and comment. Tell us where you're watching from. We'll be able to see the comments of all the different platforms live. Maybe towards the end, we can see if you have any questions that we can reference and answer. So we'd love for you to interact a little bit as we go. Tonight we're going to talk about a topic that we once read about in a book. I don't know that we necessarily have any personal experience with this topic.
Not at all.
No, I don't think so, but some of you may. We're talking about overcoming when life is overwhelming.
Yeah.
And of course the reality is, we have 4 kids, we both work, we have big vision for our lives, and we know a little bit about overcoming in the midst of being overwhelmed.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this topic tonight because I feel like, overwhelm is something that I don't know about you, but I personally have to overcome on a constant, even sometimes daily basis.
Yeah.
Just trying to, walk in the fullness of my calling, in all of the areas of life I'm called to walk in. And so, yeah, I feel like it's a really important topic, especially with everything going on in the world right now too.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me that there's almost a connection between someone who is really taking life seriously, they want to excel in all their roles, they want to accomplish the destiny that God's set them on the earth for, they want to make a big impact, something about really going hard after God and going after your calling and wanting to be, just excellent in all of the different responsibilities and roles that you have, that almost makes you more prone to, feeling overwhelmed, or at least feeling the pressures of all those roles and responsibilities that could cause someone to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I think also there's a lot of emotions connected to overwhelm. I think that overwhelm is, typically the place you land at the end before, a blow up, right, of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, I'd love to talk about some of the emotions that lead up to that as well tonight.
Yeah. Well, as we get going, just a real brief just reminder for any of you who might be new, we do this podcast, Spirit and Counsel, just kind of as an expression of something that we've walked out for over 20 years of marriage. I come from a ministry and pastoral background with kind of a focus on supernatural ministry, that kind of thing, prophetic healing, inner healing, deliverance, etc. We've done all of those things together for our entire relationship. And you come from also a pretty unique background.
Yeah, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapist. So I currently practice in an office in Charlotte, so where I see clients and do all the fun things.
Yeah, and for as long as she's been doing this, as she's talked about some of the tools that she uses in counseling and just some of the wisdom just that comes from that realm that most people don't really know anything about, I always think the body of Christ needs this stuff. This is so helpful, So that's kind of why we do the podcast. So welcome. I wanted to start by reading some definitions of overwhelm, and this is pretty interesting. Sometimes definitions are a great place to start to just give clarity on what are we really talking about here. So these are some of the definitions that I found. To overwhelm means to bury or drown beneath a huge mass. So to be buried or to drown.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah, that's pretty descriptive. Another definition of overwhelm is to defeat completely. And the sample sentence they gave is like, the team overwhelmed their opponents. So to feel like you're just being defeated. Another definition is to give too much of something to someone, to inundate. And so sometimes to be overwhelmed feels like, oh, it's just too much. There's, Jesus promised abundant life, which doesn't necessarily mean that life will always be happy and wonderful. It just means there will be a lot of life going on if we're going to walk with Jesus. To be inundated sometimes feels overwhelming. Another definition is to overwhelm can be to have a strong emotional effect. And the sample sentence for this one says, I was overwhelmed with guilt. We might talk about that a little later. Guilt and shame sometimes can even play into that experience of being overwhelmed. Another definition, this is the last one, is to be too strong for or to overpower. If someone's saying they're being overwhelmed, they might be saying, I feel like I'm being overpowered by, life or by this challenge or by what's going on in my family or finances. It feels, like this is just too strong for me to deal with. It's overpowering me. So that's some pretty intense language to understand what it means when someone says, I feel overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, it is. And, I found that with overwhelm, there's really one of two things that typically happen is one, a person just completely, goes off the rail a little bit, where they may have an outburst of some sort. They may say things they don't mean or things that they do mean, but typically it can end in some kind of blow up. Or it can end in just complete and total just shut down. And so normally one of those two things are going to be the outcome of overwhelm, which isn't really pleasant necessarily.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate.
So I guess I would maybe love to talk about some emotions that lead up to overwhelm, along with some things to maybe do or implement to help prevent overwhelm. And I think one thing that we were talking about this topic tonight, and I was telling Justin, I was like, it's in society and culture we're in, there's a temptation to have to, you've got the role as a mom and you've got the role of just making sure, or perfectionism, it's out there, it's in our face sometimes. We want to make sure our kids are dressed a certain way and, they speak 3 languages and they, they do all the activities and all the things, or, and then, in the role of a wife, of course, wanting to serve your husband and keep romance alive. And then, there's the role of a Christian and wanting to, of course, walk in the fullness of who you are within the Lord and your identity. And sometimes, in that in itself, and have your daily devotion and stay connected and worship and all the things. And then you're a friend and you're a daughter and I'm a counselor. So, I think we all as humans wear many hats, have different roles, and in any of those purposes that the Lord has given us to do, we can feel overwhelmed, especially when we go outside of what the Lord has asked us to do in those roles. and also when we operate kind of out of our capacity for those roles. And so, last time we talked a lot about self-awareness, and so I think that's one thing that plays a role here. And also, and like I said, some of those emotions that lead up to overwhelm, I think that fear, for one, fear of, whatever, if we were going to take the role as a mom, fear that my kids aren't going to, thrive, that they aren't going to, that they won't be who the Lord's called them to be, that maybe we'll miss a hidden talent in there if we don't expose it to them, right? Or whatever it is. And then also, fear can lead to anger. So, especially if we're over functioning in any of these roles, that's when I'm talking about moving on past the capacity that we have to give. And that's where the work of boundaries come in, which I know we're going to talk about some tonight. And obviously anxiety can be part of that as well. I think, fear and anxiety are sometimes the same thing, but those are some emotions connected to overwhelm.
Yeah. And one of the definitions we read talked about guilt. And I do also think that guilt or shame can be wrapped up in there as well. And whenever you're talking about kind of the expectations placed on a mom, a wife, a believer, a counselor, each one of those roles, there's expectations maybe that others have, maybe that we put on ourselves. And I think, I know we all have different tendencies, but I know I have, high expectations, I guess you could say, for myself. And so I think whenever we feel like we're not meeting those expectations, or like, we're not excelling, I think guilt or shame can play a part in kind of that unraveling that can lead us to feel overwhelmed, like, this is impossible, forget it, how can I succeed in all these roles at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So, I guess this may lead into, boundaries. So, when I say boundary work, what do you think? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, we talked about this earlier, and I said, you might want to define boundary work, because I know usually for me the word work is connected to, working with your hands, manual labor, doing something that you physically exert yourself, or something that is even mentally strenuous. I don't really typically, we've kind of been walking this out for years, but I don't think that it's natural or the first instinct for people to associate work with something that's more emotional or, psychological, mental, that kind of thing. And so whenever I first hear that boundary work, I think like, are we talking about like we're going to rebuild the fence in the backyard? Yeah. What are we going to put one of those underwire shocking, fences for the dog? Or
yeah. Well, no, that's a great question. So when I say boundary work, I'm talking about identifying, what we want our boundaries to be. And there's different types of boundaries, emotional boundaries, mental boundaries, and then there are physical boundaries. And then really the work comes in when we decide to hold our boundaries. And in a lot of cases that calls us to communicate them, saying no to things that try, to maybe, jump over the fence in a sense, or go past our boundaries. And so that's really where the hard work is, because I think that there can even be guilt and shame connected to that. I did recently read a book on boundaries that was really good, by Lisa Turkers, called Goodbyes and Good Boundaries, and it's just an awesome resource. on boundaries, and she really talks about how boundaries are biblical, and gives the example of even the temple, and how there was boundaries all throughout the temple. And that was such a great framework for me to think about, because I think sometimes boundaries can feel mean or harsh or restrictive or not loving. And I once heard someone say, and forgive me, I can't recall who said it, but that boundaries is the best way for me to love myself and you at the same time. And I loved that. That resonated with me so much. And so, yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, as I've kind of become, and I think culture has become a little more emotionally intelligent over the last 10 or 20 years. It seems to be kind of a, cultural focus. And I think even boundaries, the language of boundaries is a little more kind of in there's a word, a French word like this, I can't think of it. Anyway, the spirit of the culture is a little more aware of boundaries, but usually we're talking about boundaries in relationships whenever we say boundaries, at least in, recent history. But you talked about mental and emotional boundaries, and I think that's really interesting because I do think that's biblical, and I think that that's something that I sort of automatically do without even thinking about it. But like there are, I don't let myself go to certain places in my thoughts or in my emotions. You know what I mean? Like if someone is melting down and they're inviting me to join them in their meltdown, then I'm not going to go there. And I think that that's sort of the idea of taking every thought captive, I'm not going to allow myself to kind of spin out. I understand you're really worried about that and you're really fearful about that, but I'm not going to join you in your fear there. Instead, I'm going to, trust the Lord, and we'll take it serious.
Yeah.
So I do think that probably a lot of us have some of those mental and emotional boundaries, functioning that maybe we haven't even thought about. And they can be very helpful. If you have a certain standard, like, I don't do, worry over this thing or that thing. I don't do emotional meltdowns over this thing. Even just having that as a standard can actually keep you from going there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be interested, what are some things that you kind of have mental boundaries around that are helpful for you to, to not go into overwhelm, I guess?
Yeah. I think I definitely have something around finances.
Okay.
I don't stress over money. I take it seriously, whenever we know that there's a significant financial thing that is going to the Lord's going to have to do it. I take it serious, but we talked about this in a previous podcast, but we've kind of been through some real seasons of testing and being refined by the fire as related to finances. And so that's one of them. And I would say just in general, it's rare that I would get spun out in anxiety or worry or sort of doing the sort of the fear, all the what ifs and all that kind of stuff. I might do some of that emotionally or subconsciously, but I just don't let my mind go there, just because I think I've probably had enough bad experiences with it that I have kind of a red flag, alarm system. I already know where that goes. I'm going to refocus my mind, and I might need to get alone with the Lord or whatever, but I'm not going to go there. So I'd say around finances and kind of, anxiety and, melting down and worry and fear. For the most part, I think that there's something internally that is a boundary that keeps me from often going there, I guess.
Yeah, so when even the thought of whatever it is, like a worry or whatever enters your head, how do you take it captive? Do you just acknowledge it and just immediately return it to the Lord in prayer? Or what do you do?
Yeah, I think that I kind of consider it as it's the Lord's responsibility to handle things that are impossible for me to handle.
Oh, that's good.
And so,
Yeah.
like if there's an impossible situation, even things that are a little simpler, like we were talking about something today without getting into all the details. And I was saying, and it was an opportunity we had, and I thought, I would really love to do this. This would be awesome, but it's not possible for me to make it happen. So let's see what the Lord does,
Yeah.
And I'm at peace with the fact that I don't know whether it's going to work out or not, but I've seen the Lord so many times do the impossible, and often it's like on our part, it's effortless. We're just like, the more we can kind of rest and trust that the Lord's going to shift things around, the more it seems like, the more that kind of frees him to move. It's like our faith is engaging with whatever the situation is, and he moves. So,
well, I think I hear you talking about like just really staying in his presence. And even like the act of being present, I guess. Somewhat. That's
probably one way that you could say it. And I think a lot of it kind of starts in my thinking, my thinking and my words. And I do think that the words that we say are very powerful for kind of writing the script for what we think about and what we feel. And so I will say things like that, and it's really not like, I'm not trying to convince myself of it, but I'll just say like, well, there's nothing that I can do about that, but I'm going to trust the Lord. And it's like, even saying that, it's like my spirit says, yes, I'm going to trust the Lord. Like, this is not something that I can,
That's awesome.
Which of you by worrying can add a single cubit to your stature? Like, it's not, do not fret, it only causes harm. And so, and I think I grew, I was familiar with sort of worry, anxiety, and some of those emotions growing up. And so I have an allergy to some of those things that is, kind of kept me from going there, I guess.
Yeah. And, I was even looking at Psalm 62:1, where it says, my soul finds rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him. He alone is my rock salvation. He's my fortress. I will never be shaken. And the part of that verse that really speaks to me in response to overwhelm, and finding, rest, finding his presence, being present in his presence. My soul finds rest in God alone.
Yeah.
And so, at the end of the day, even with all the boundary work and all the things, God alone is where we find our rest.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that you had that verse, but I actually had the same verse in a different translation.
Oh, okay.
And it actually says, from the end of the earth, I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Did you say Psalm 61?
62:1.
Oh, that's crazy. So this is Psalm 61:2.
Okay.
It says, from the end of the earth I will cry to you when my heart is overwhelmed. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I.
Yeah.
For you have been a shelter for me, a strong tower from the enemy. I will abide in your tabernacle or your presence forever. I will trust in the shelter of your wings. So, wow. So Psalm 62:1 and 61:2 are both great verses to...
Well, and I think the part that your verse really speaks to me about is abiding, which is kind of a similar word. I don't know, maybe it's the same word. I have to look it up, but similar word to resting, staying, that present peace in the Lord.
Yeah, lead me to the rock who is higher than I. So... God is an unshakable rock. You can put all your weight on him because he's a rock, and he's also higher than us. He's more powerful and more wise and more capable, and it's good.
Yeah. All right. So.
Yeah. So some of the boundaries that we talked about earlier, you talked about there's some boundaries that maybe you set up with people. There's some boundaries that you set up emotionally, mentally, maybe with our time. What time can we invest here? What time we can't. So maybe let's talk through some of those things, some of the boundaries that we have to set up in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I've even done some work in my own life around is just because I'm good at something or even just because I'm anointed in an area of my life, it doesn't mean that it's boundaryless, right? Like that the Lord hasn't called me to just kind of free for all, in it. Because one, it can be exhausting, and also because, and not because, people are necessarily trying to, make you exhausted or take from you or anything like that. But a lot of the time, and I'm sure I've done it as well, you see something that someone's gifted in, and so, you're going to pull on their gifting, or you're going to pull on the things that they're good at. It's the work that I have done and are continuing to do is being able to go to the Lord and say, hey God, is this a place that I'm supposed to be using this gift in? Is this a place where I'm supposed to be using my energy, my whatever in? And so, and being able to follow his voice in that, and also, realizing that, it's not because I don't want to give or I don't want to help or anything like that, but perhaps the Lord has me reserve it for something else that he has me to do, and being able to say no and hold my no, and that can sometimes actually be painful.
Yeah, so like if you're good at something and it's easy for you to do something, and people see that, and so people may come and say, hey, will you do this for me, and will you do that for me? And one reason I think that we end up being overwhelmed is we become overcommitted. And so now it's not necessarily that we've committed to do things that we don't have the ability to do. These are things that we can do. But rather than maybe seeking the Lord, is this something that I should commit to? Am I called to this in this season? Seeking the Lord to kind of get our priorities from him and just clarity on what are we called to in this season can help us to not get overcommitted and therefore overwhelmed.
And sometimes people can get angry because you don't say yes. And honestly, sometimes, that's not their anger or whatever it is not your responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes someone else who is overwhelmed or someone else who is in a bad place, they want to invite you into their being overwhelmed. They want you to fix something. They want you to act because they feel overwhelmed. But you have a choice whether or not you allow their crisis to become your crisis. Whether or not their overwhelmed state is going to overwhelm you. And maybe you can help them in their crisis, or maybe you should, or maybe you shouldn't. But just because someone comes to you with a problem doesn't mean that it's yours to solve.
Yes, and I think also being vulnerable in this space, I think that another thing that I've had to do some work on and around and continue to is not saying yes or doing something just purely out of compassion. Because compassion, especially, it's a strong emotion, right? Like, especially when you see someone in need and you can help, right? And I think also we can sometimes even find verses to say justify that's the word I'm looking for. To justify our compassion, but we cannot operate purely out of just compassion, like having being able to partner our compassion with the Lord and asking him, like, is this what you have me to do right now? And if it's not, perhaps my role here is just to pray. or connect you with someone who can help you.
Yeah, even Jesus, he had compassion on the multitude because they were like sheep without a shepherd, but he didn't meet the need of every person that he came across.
Yeah.
He only did what he saw the Father do. He only said what he heard the Father saying. And so even though he had compassion, he was not led by compassion. He was led by what is the Father doing right now? What is he being called to do? That's a lot of wisdom.
Yeah, and it's also really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're a compassionate person.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, okay. Well, what about boundaries with our time commitments? How do we, whenever you are, in my case, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I'm a part of an awesome ministry that, we have tons of stuff going on, a lot of vision, a lot of things that we're building, a lot of things that we're starting. Also have several different kinds of online ministry that we do. I have another YouTube channel that's kind of a hobby thing. I have friends. We have, social life. There's so many things that could take up all of my time or our time. So how do we make the right boundaries as far as if I spend my 2 hours free in the evening, 2 hours free, I don't know where those are, but if you spend your time in the evenings doing this thing, then that means you're not going to be able to do all these other things.
Yeah.
So how do we manage that with all the demands and all the roles that we play?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously, I think, our priorities and our values, they are the things that kind of lead us and like what we live out of. And so I think that typically what we spend our time on, our money, our gifts on come out of those places, right? And also I think in that, it's similar to what we've been talking about too, is, a lot of it is really being in tune with what the Holy Spirit has us to do in all the areas of our life. If we have 2 hours, there's sometimes I have 30 minutes and I will literally be like, Lord, what am I supposed to do with my time right now? And sometimes it's just play with my 2-year-old. Because she needs some connection and she's important. But I have a sink full of dishes. So I feel like with time, it really has to do with what does the Lord want you to do with your time, being aligned with that, and and does it align with your values?
Yeah, I had a really interesting experience. How to share this in the best way. I was working with somebody on a project, and I had kind of come into a team who had done basically this same type of project. Most of the people on the team for years, and so I kind of came in and was new and was just fully giving myself to it, and it was something that was important, and it was something that took a lot of work and a lot of man hours to get it done. And so the person that I was working with, I said to them like one night, like, hey, well, I've got to finish up for the night. I think the kids had sports, and so I got off of the phone and couldn't be a part of meetings that night, and then got back at it early in the next morning. I think by like 6 a.m. I was back at it again. And then later that day, something else came up. Maybe it was a Saturday, and I said, hey, listen, Saturday's usually family day, and I'm going to be out of pocket for the next 4 hours. And so we kind of went through this whole project, working with a team. And I later found out that the person who was kind of leading the team said to several other people, and they were saying this was a positive thing, and they were kind of saying it joking, but it surprised them. They said, like, I was really shocked working with Justin because he has boundaries. That's literally the words that they used. He has boundaries. Like, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that now. I'm not available to do this. And it's like with 4 kids who are, all pretty young. Our oldest is 11, and with a family that I love way more than any assignment or project that I'm ever going to be working on. Without boundaries, by the grace of God, like I can't imagine that kind of a life where anything that's important gets to sort of bulldoze over my priorities and my values, my family, time with the Lord. I've been late to important meetings. I don't recommend this at all, but a few times, like once, even a few weeks ago, I was late to something because I was having an encounter with the Lord, and I couldn't pull myself away from it. It had been months since I'd encountered the Lord in this way, and I was just willing to deal with the consequences, because my highest value, I was being fulfilled in the area of my highest value, anyway, it was worth it, whatever the consequences were in that moment, to encounter the Lord in the way that I was. And it ended up being totally fine. And it often is, whenever you're in the will of God, there's often grace to cover the other responsibilities. So boundaries.
Yeah, I think also with time, if the things of your highest value, hopefully being God and your family, if they are suffering because of something else, right? I think that that's an indicator that some boundaries need to be put up in that area of time.
Yeah.
I think also if you're being exhausted by an area of your life that is, taken away from, that their highest priorities, hopefully God and family. I think that's also another indicator to put up some boundaries.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, if the things that are most important are suffering because of things that are less important, then we want to rearrange things. We want to prioritize things different.
Yeah.
For sure. So some of the things that are connected to being overwhelmed. So whenever someone, maybe they didn't do so well with the boundaries, they sort of, maybe didn't have tools that they needed in order to kind of deal with the demands that were on them. Being overwhelmed can manifest in some different ways. So it's not always just, oh my gosh, this is too much, I don't know what to do. Sometimes whenever someone is overwhelmed, the way that it manifests is they're mad. They're angry, right?
Yes.
Or maybe they're afraid.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're anxious, or maybe they, get in shame. And I think that that's really interesting, because sometimes what we're feeling is not really, we're not feeling it because of, we're not really mad, we're just overwhelmed. We're not really, we don't really want to, we're not mad at someone because they did something.
Right.
Our being overwhelmed is sort of manifesting as being mad or being afraid. So what's that all about? Why is it that being overwhelmed can kind of come out in these different ways? Or
well, I think typically there's some sort of fear, that everyone can be birthed out of, at least, and a lot of the times it may have to do with one's identity or worth, not feeling like maybe even good enough, not feeling like they're able to do the things that they want to do, being afraid that if they don't say yes, then another opportunity is not going to come along, being afraid that people aren't going to like them, people aren't going to think they're anointed or whatever it is, or good, or and so that can definitely lead to living outside your boundaries too, which leads to overwhelm. And so there's that. And then as as one can continue along in the fear, you know, there can be anger that things aren't going the way they thought they would, or that, you know, I think I probably a good, you know, I don't know, a small example of this is, you know, as a mom, sometimes it can feel overwhelming when all four kids are screaming and the dishes and
You mean like 45 minutes ago?
Yeah, exactly. And dinner needs to be made and all the things. And so it can, you know, then anger can rise up. Anger can totally rise up.
Sure.
But what could have been helpful beforehand was, you know, having some boundaries with my kids, and also communicating, hey, I need help. You know, and you know, can you come and help me, please? So whoever I need to ask help for.
Yeah, you said something about identity in there that really caught my attention because, you know, if I am in my role as, say, a dad, if my identity is tied up in my performance, then the way that being overwhelmed is going to come out is going to be different.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, you know, if someone is overwhelmed and, you know, they have too many time commitments, there's too many problems to solve, there's too much, you know, too many things that they need to fix, there's just too much weight, all the definitions that we read, right? They feel like they're being overwhelmed. You know, maybe a healthy way to think about that would be, okay, so I've overcommitted myself, or I have, you know, somewhere along the line, there's something that I need to change in order to fix this. That would maybe be kind of a clear-headed way to respond. But another way to respond would be, I am a horrible father.
Exactly.
You know, like I am not, you know, enough as a man, you know, because in the midst of being overwhelmed, you know, if my identity is tied to my performance, then I'm going to internalize it as something different than it is.
Yeah, and if one of your things is people pleasing, you know, these people are never happy.
Right.
No matter what these people, you know, I'm not a good enough whatever.
Yeah.
Because if I was, then they would be happy, you know, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that anytime our identity is tied up in what we do, it's not going to end well. You know, it's either going to end with we are confused, and maybe we end up in pride or delusion because we have performed well, and so now we feel really good about ourselves, versus if we don't feel like we've performed well enough and now we feel worthless, whenever the reality is our identity has to do with who we are, not what we do, and it has to do with whose we are, not what we do.
Yeah.
And so if we have that clear, you know, that my identity isn't impacted by whether or not I perform, I think that actually insulates us a little bit from being overwhelmed, because it doesn't devalue me. It doesn't, you know, it's not devastating for me in the core of who I am whenever I'm not able to do everything that every person and every commitment demands that I do. Yeah. I'm still okay with who I am, you know, even if I feel overwhelmed in the moment.
Yeah, that's really good. And also, I think that takes a lot of practice.
Sure.
You know?
It takes recognizing as well that my identity is wrapped up in the wrong thing.
Yes, and constantly, you know, and consistently reminding yourself of that, right? Yeah. And you know, and maybe even sometimes writing it down, having it somewhere you can look at. You know, sometimes we need that visual reminder of who we are, especially in hard moments or situations, you know, dinner time specifically.
Amen. Dinner time and bedtime.
Yeah.
Well, some of the ways that we've kind of talked through a lot of different angles of kind of feeling overwhelmed, maybe why we end up overwhelmed, different ways that it manifests. But let's shift gears a little bit and start talking about how do we overcome in the midst of life seeming overwhelming.
Sure.
To kind of bring it to the point of, obviously we don't just want to commiserate about things being hard, but some solutions, some things that we can actually implement. So let's talk about some of those. So we obviously talked about this beforehand, but both of us, I think at the top of our list was getting in the presence of God, being a way that we can deal with being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
I think that getting in the presence of God, and that could be as simple as putting on a worship song for 5 minutes,
Totally.
shutting the door and, getting alone for a few minutes. And there's something about the presence of God just brings clarity. Whenever we get in the presence of God, things that are confusing or things that are frustrating or where we don't have answers, getting in the presence of God, obviously there's peace that comes, there's courage or encouragement, there's a lot that happens. In your presence is fullness of joy. The joy of the Lord is our strength.
Yeah.
So I think that's obviously at the top of our list. What do we do when we're overwhelmed? Should be we want to try to connect with the Lord as kind of a first line of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also inviting people, safe people that you feel like you can trust, and sharing with them, especially if you're stuck in overwhelm. I think that is really a tough space to be stuck in.
Mm-hmm. So having somebody to debrief with about what's happening, how you're feeling.
Yeah. And, whether it's a counselor or if it's, like I said, another safe person that you trust that's not going to share your stuff with others, but someone that will just listen. A lot of the times in overwhelm, you don't necessarily need solutions.
Mm-hmm.
You just need someone to listen and be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also whenever we're feeling overwhelmed, it's usually an indicator that something needs to change, even if it's just a matter of the way that you're thinking about the situation needs to change. But it's kind of an indicator, you don't want to stay in that place, so something needs to be adjusted. And I think one thing that really helps is the more clarity we have on our purpose, like what is the most important thing for me in this season. Like I could list off, 5 or 6 things right now that I know are taking up the vast majority of my time and my energy because those are the things that are most important in this season. And actually a couple of those things would have been different a year ago.
Yeah.
And, and that's the way that our life is. It's like we have assignments from the Lord. We have maybe with our family things that we're, goals that we're working towards or things that we're doing together. And so whenever we have clarity on our purpose, I think that also really helps because we can evaluate, this thing over here is more of, it's like a time sink. It's not something that is all that connected to my purpose.
Yeah.
It's not something that I really find joy in or that strengthens me. Maybe that could be a relationship, that seems to contribute to feeling overwhelmed. Or maybe it could be, something you've committed yourself to. Or so clarity on our purpose and kind of, what are the main things that I'm supposed to give my time and my energy to helps us to prioritize and helps us in some cases to say, okay, this is not in this season. I don't need to go to that Tuesday night thing that I committed to anymore.
Yeah.
Or in this season, I don't need to be paying for that subscription that I never used that's causing things to be a little tighter, right now. And so I'm going to get rid of that. So clarity on our purpose, I think, is really helpful in digging out of the overwhelmed place.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And I think also, like I said, sometimes if we're stuck and overwhelmed, it's really hard to get clarity on our own. So I think that's when accountability can come in, even just being able to talk out loud to someone and be able to say to them, which is a boundary, I actually don't want your advice. I just want you to be someone I can talk out loud to,
Yeah, that's good.
So,
yeah, at where I work, Cry, it's an awesome nonprofit admissions organization, and we've got several kind of major big projects that we're working on right now, things that we're building, and everything kind of converged December and early January, and so the whole team has been working so hard. It's been amazing, but in the midst of that, sometimes it really feels like there's too many responsibilities and not enough time, or there's too much to do and not enough time. And so the guy I work with, Sean Malone, he's awesome. I've known him forever. We're good friends. And so I can kind of talk to him very real about what's going on.
Yeah.
And so he and I often are kind of feeling the same thing and kind of going through the same process. So I was talking to him recently and just talking about, what do we need to prioritize right now? And he said, I'll tell you what I did. I was feeling that way yesterday, just feeling like there's a lot, Lord, help us to prioritize. And he said, so in the midst of all of these things and I know need to get done, we've got a little push and then things are really going to change. He said, so what I did is I went and took a nap. That was the wisdom.
That's awesome.
Yeah, in the midst of that intensity.
That's
because
amazing.
It's almost like warfare against the overwhelming feeling.
I love that.
It's like in the midst of the pressure and the intensity, it's like I'm just gonna, bite my thumb at the whole thing, and I'm gonna go take a nap. Just lay down and rest in the Lord, and it's like a statement of confidence. Lord, you are the rock who is higher than I. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I, and that's really good. I actually remember. This is years ago, 6-7 years ago, something like that. It was during a week or a couple weeks where I was teaching every other day, and I had a couple different preaching commitments, like maybe a Sunday and a couple conference sessions, in addition to all the other responsibilities that I had. And so it was intense because it was like all of these different classes that I'm teaching and messages that I'm preaching, they're all different content. And I mean, the way that I like to do it, and for years I was able to do it this way, like any message that I preached that would be an hour, I would prepare like 20 hours for that 1 hour.
Yeah, you did.
And so whenever I would have like 12 hours, in a week period or so, obviously if you do the math, there's not 240 hours of prep time, in a week or two. And so I was in the midst of one of those times of just real intensity and, nowhere near enough time to get ready for the responsibilities that I had. And there was one day where it had been a really intense day, and I came home and I knew I was teaching at like 9 the next morning. I got home late, I was tired, and I knew what I needed to do was stay up late preparing for the class that I was going to teach or a message I was going to preach, and then get up really early the next morning so I could prepare for the next thing that I was going to be doing later that day. But instead, I came home and I felt like the Lord told me, go get ice cream and go to a movie. And so I came home and said, hey, tonight we're going to go and we're going to, at that time we might have only had 1 or 2 kids. And so that's what we did. We went and got ice cream and we went to a movie. And there was so much joy. I think, again, it was almost like in the face of all of the pressure, saying like, I'm not going to get overwhelmed. I'm not going to get stressed out. I'm just going to rest in the Lord. Let's go have fun and let's go enjoy ourselves. And I remember, like, even in the movie, it was like a Marvel movie, totally secular, but like the Lord was speaking to me and I was feeling the presence of God, having ice cream, and, felt like I was receiving an anointing just going and having fun with my family.
Yeah.
And then the next morning, I was nowhere near, I wasn't prepared as far as the way that I would normally prepare. But out of that place of rest, there was a deeper preparation. There was something in my spirit that was being prepared. And it ended up being a really powerful day. And I just remember, because it it marked me because it was so counter to the pressures of the day.
Yeah.
Go and stay up all night preparing. No, just go have ice cream and go to a movie. And it was like I was more anointed the next day than I would have been if I would have stayed up all night and got up early preparing.
I love that. I love that. And it leads me to a verse that I had wanted to mention, Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. And take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Amen. So, so the true, whatever we want to call it, remedy, whatever, is resting in the Lord.
Yeah.
And
his burden, his yoke is presence. Easy. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
Amen. Yeah.
Which is easier said than done, but.
Yeah. Yeah, and the yoke was what they would put on the ox. The work that they were doing, it was the yoke on the shoulders of the ox. That was their work. It was a symbol of work. Mm-hmm. And so he's saying that the work I'm going to give you to do, it shouldn't be heavy, it shouldn't be burdensome, it shouldn't be hard. I mean, sometimes it's challenging because we've got to work, but it shouldn't be heavy in the way that it burdens you down and, makes you miserable if we're doing it with the Lord, if we're, taking his yoke. That's really good. I also think just very practically for me, often just a change of scenery is really helpful. Mm-hmm. So like we will often go on a walk, we did that tonight. We will get out of the house, and sometimes for me, whenever I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed, what I really need is like creative energy, like I need creativity. I need to kind of get out of the rut. And so just doing something different, something totally unrelated to what I'm doing, a change of scenery, taking a break can be really helpful. Yeah. It's counterintuitive because you would think, well, buckle down harder and focus more on what's in front of you so that you can get it done. But it sometimes is actually much more helpful to totally unplug from whatever you're overwhelmed with and go do something completely unrelated, something maybe you would even enjoy. Yeah. And often that does get creativity flowing, and you can get back to a place of peace and joy, and then you're kind of ready to face whatever you were overwhelmed with. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a couple more things that we wrote down here. We already talked a little bit about this, but priorities are huge. I think actually writing out your priorities is very helpful. Again, and just identifying these are the things that are not helpful. These are the things that I do need to be focusing on. And through the years, being in roles where I usually had a team of people that I was working with, that I was giving direction to, in many different situations, there have been people on my team who have come to me and they've been overwhelmed. They've said, I don't feel like I can get this done, or I don't know how to handle these different situations with people. And so something that I have often done, first of all, is listen. Like you said, sometimes people just need to, they just need to talk. They just need to say it, and they kind of will talk through to a solution themselves many times. But one thing that I always encourage people with, and I think this is something we need to encourage ourselves with, is, yes, you want to write down your priorities. You want to know these 4 things, focus on them. The other 8 things, just let them drop because those are not the main thing. But, and I think this is probably the last thing that I'll say because I think it's really important. You can only do the best that you can do, right? You can give your all, and beyond that, there's no more that you can give. There's no better that you can do. Yeah. And so ultimately, we do want to be people of excellence. We want to excel in all of our roles and responsibilities, the ones that God's actually given to us. But in the end, like, you want to give it your all, you want to give it your best, and then you've got to trust the Lord with the rest of it.
That's good. That's
good. He's much more powerful. He's a lot better at everything than we are. Yeah. And so whenever we give it our best we can then rest and trust that the Lord's going to cover the rest of it. And so that's often what I would encourage a stressed out, overwhelmed team member with.
That's really good. That's really good. And I think it also helps us to not go into overfunctioning or micromanaging or whatever it is, worry, doing more than we should. And so I think that's great.
Amen. Just kind of looking through the chat. I don't see any questions per se, but let me say this. We will go through and read the comments. If you do have any questions or you want to give us any feedback, just leave it in the chat, whatever platform you're on. We will be able to respond to you. Maybe you have something that's going on in your life that you can relate to, and maybe the Lord showed you something that helped you to get out of that place of being overwhelmed. So leave that in the comments. If you haven't yet said where you're watching from, go ahead and comment, and just so we'll know, who all is with us and who all is watching. And I do want to ask one more time as we get ready to wrap it up, please consider sharing the video. Especially if you're on Facebook, that's one of the things that catches the attention of Facebook's algorithms. So things that are shared more often are promoted more and get in front of more people. And we don't do any kind of paid advertising or marketing. So, word of mouth and whatever engagement you all do is pretty much, what is going to carry this podcast wherever it's supposed to go. So, so thank you for joining us. I do think, although we joked at the beginning, this is a topic that we merely read about and we heard that sometimes people are overwhelmed. Yeah. I think it's something that really we can all relate to. If you have big vision for your life, then it's very likely that, you're shooting for the moon, you're shooting for the stars, and you're going to go big or go home. And in the midst of I've been spending a lot of time in Psalm 24. It's 2024. Psalm 24, I think, is a real word for this year. And the generation of Jacob is kind of what that psalm is built around. Jacob was hungry, and he had this spirit of, I'm going to get the blessing of God, the favor of God, no matter what. I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to go for it. He would lie, cheat, and steal to get the blessing of God. And I don't necessarily recommend that, but God loved the heart of Jacob. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. And we want to be that generation of Jacob kind of person where we're going to pursue the call of God. We're not going to let him go until he blesses us and until he, fulfills the calling on our life. But we will never accomplish the call of God on our life out of our stress, our anxiety, our being overwhelmed. It's not by might, it's not by power, it's by my spirit, says the Lord. And so we want to recognize that in our pursuit of the big call of God on our life, that feeling of being overwhelmed or stressed out can actually be kind of an alarm bell for us. Like, okay, so whether I've gotten into striving or I've overcommitted myself, this is not where I want to live. I want to take his yoke upon me that is easy, his burden that is light. And so hopefully, out of this discussion, we can all kind of step into a greater place of rest, which really is a greater place of fruitfulness. Anything you want to share before we kind of...
No, I think we covered it.
We solved everybody's problems.
We solved them.
All of them. Good. All right, on to... solving the rest of the world's problems tomorrow. As we do get ready to close, I want to mention, if you want to be added to our email list, we today, both of us, without knowing it, we set up 2 different email softwares, not realizing that we were both working on that.
We were ambitious.
Yes, we were, but not overwhelmed.
No.
So that's, so we actually have now an email software that we're setting up to fix the issues we've been having with email. If you've gotten bounce backs or you haven't been getting emails, give us grace. And if you've already done this and you haven't gotten an email from us, please do it again. Send us an email at supernaturaltheology@gmail.com if you're signing up for the first time, or if you signed up a month or two ago and have never gotten an email from us, just send us an email, supernaturaltheology@gmail.com. We will add you to the list, and I am hopeful that this new solution is going to fix the problem that we've been having.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So we'd love to hear from you, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining us. We are, of course, Wednesday nights at 5:05. We do Supernatural Theology every single Wednesday night. And then this Thursday, so just in a few days, I'll be doing Deep Waters, Prophetic Prayer and Worship, which is kind of an interactive, waiting on the Lord, praying together, sharing prophetic revelation in the chat, that kind of thing. It'll be on these same platforms at 7:30 a.m. Eastern. And so if you want to join live, it's been really powerful every time we've done it. So I hope to see you for Deep Waters or Supernatural Theology. This is Justin and LeeAnna saying thank you for joining us.
All right. Have a great night.
Yep. We'll see you on the next one.